Thank you so much for joining. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the cultural and ecological significance of killer whales on this coast. We have 4 contributors from the book Spirits of the Coast, which I have right here. Spirits of the Coast. Oh, Nikki has hers too. Good. Oh, amazing. And if you haven't checked it out, it's such a beautiful collection of work from Indigenous knowledge keepers and marine biologists and artists and poets and storytellers, all united around their enchantment with killer whales. So tonight we'll be diving into the book and how it was created and what accountability to the coast and killer whales really looks like, what we can learn from killer whales, and a big focus on the southern resident population of killer whales, which is facing extinction. They're severely endangered. And we might even hear from our speakers, they might be reading passages from the book. My name's Alex, and I do communications and storytelling at Raincoast. Of the Hulkaminam and Sinchothan speaking people. So I'll do a quick introduction to all of our speakers. Tonight we have Eric Mazimpaka, who's an artist from Nairobi, Kenya, and he's currently living in Vancouver. We have Jess Housty, who is a member of the Healthsignation. She's an activist, a plant worker, and an advocate for land-based learning and healing. We have Nikki Sanchez. She is a co-author of the book, as well as an Indigenous media maker and environmental educator. And last but not least, we have Misty MacDuffee. She's a biologist and Raincoast's wild salmon program director. So to kick it off, I'd love to hear from the speakers where your connection with killer whales started. Then you guys can, whoever wants to go first can go.
I would have to say when we first immigrated to Canada and I watched Free Willy. That was the movie that did it for me. Yeah.
I was really fortunate to grow up in my homelands in Bella Bella, which is right on the outer coast, the outer central coast of BC. And I can't remember a time when I wasn't aware of killer whales. I was really fortunate to spend a lot of time out on the lands and waters as a little girl, and they've just been embedded in my existence and my understanding of the world around me for as long as I can remember, which is such a blessing.
I would have to say that salmon actually led me to killer whales sort of more from a work perspective, but I was fortunate to be able to travel the central coast or the whole coast when I was younger, and the encounters with killer whales on those journeys was pretty amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah, and just for me, it's similar to Jess. Like it's like a cedar or a fir, and I don't remember ever living in a world that wasn't cohabitated with orca whales. But I do remember the 1994 Commonwealth Games that featured Klewick as their mascot. And so I think that was the first time I really started, I mean, obviously not with the same language, but understanding the ways in which as human beings, we attached meaning and we attached personality and characteristics to the animals that were our neighbors. And so it's a Free Willy, like you said, Eric, it's been really interesting to kind of watch the ways in which these animals have also like been burdened with all of these notions. And I think the book did such a good job of that, of kind of deconstructing the different eras of human projection that's put on these whales. And especially working as a wilderness guide on the coast, it's been such an incredible gift just to be around the whales and see them in their nature, in their form, and let them speak for themselves. And I feel really, really excited about this book because I think through so many different lenses, through art and photography, It is a multi-dimensional representation of all the ways in which they represent themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Nikki, can you tell us where this book all began for you?
Yeah, I was thinking about that question, and I mean, as many things do these days, this book began for me officially with an email. But in when I think about it, and I speak about this in the introduction of the book, it actually began with a dream that my mom had about 3 years ago, shortly after my stepdad had passed away. And my mom had this incredible dream about the orcas, and unlike a lot of her dreams, she actually had she had a real sense of urgency and necessity to really share this dream with people. And it ended up in a gathering on Salt Spring Island that brought together, I think about 40 folks who just were called to come together and explore ways that grassroots people could support the orcas, which are really dwindling and really suffering right now in this region. And so actually, Alex, you're part of that story. It kind of unfolded over bringing a bunch of, folks together, every age, every gender, and ending up lugging gorse through the forest, trying to figure out ecologically sound ways of constructing orca puppets to move people's hearts with art and the magic of orcas. So that's kind of where it began for me. And this book was just an opportunity along the way. But certainly, I think so many of us who live on the coast and are connected to this place feel the urgency of these times, and the orca are definitely one really powerful and magnificent entry point to start exploring and discussing the importance and the significance of taking action at this time for the place that we live and the animals that we share it with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. So for any of you guys collaborating in this book, I'm wondering if it deepened your connection to orcas or changed your relationship to killer whales in any way?
Well, previously all my art never involved any sort of figure like that. And at first I was kind of frustrated by the shape of an orca because I have a very rigid 90-degree like geometric way of painting. But it kind of harkened back to my first memory moving to Canada, which was this incredible movie about this misunderstood creature breaking that wall and finding, a new world on the other side. And once I was able to kind of go back to that nostalgia of it, it really helps deepen my appreciation for, we tend to take nature for granted. Like we forget that every animal, it plays its part in peace. And so it kind of helped bring me back to the idea of this balance, this ecosystem we live in. And that was fun to explore. And kind of also it was good to go back to those memories. And I really appreciated that time I got to share with the painting and myself as a kid.
In reading the book, I found all of the art and the chapters so moving, but the personal transformations of people that worked with whales in captivity and that whole captivity process, I was blown away by the recollections and the willingness of the writers to be so vulnerable in recognizing, what they didn't know and what they learned in the process of working with these animals as individuals. And so many of the personal encounters, it was all so moving and really, it opened up a side to these whales that I don't, that isn't so much in my daily life. I know it's there, but to hear those and read those stories was really moving.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to share that. For me, I live in a place that, it's the center of my universe, but it feels remote from where everyone else is, and often you sort of feel alone in your little introspective bubble when it comes to your relationships with wildlife and the territory around you. And when I was first approached about participating in this project, my first thought was, my God, can I be part of a project associated with a museum? You know, as an Indigenous woman and someone who cares really deeply about the intersections of social and environmental justice, the idea of participating in a project led by what is fundamentally an institution that's been part of enacting colonialism and continues to do so, that was something that I really struggled with. But one of the most beautiful aspects of this project for me has been the community of care around orcas that I've watched develop in new ways. I have known Nikki since we were little girls, and our parents were bringing us along to meetings. And you know, I have such a deep trust in your heart, Nikki, and in your integrity. And so for me, that was what made me say yes, even though I had some misgivings about how I could navigate a project led by a museum as an Indigenous woman. And as I flip through the book and I read these incredible contributions from people, and I see this just breathtaking art and these incredible stories, it's given me this really deep sense of connectivity that wasn't such a large community for me before this project. You know, I felt like I had my relationships with whales. I understood them in the context of my culture and my community, but I feel like I understand their facets so much more, having experienced them through the eyes of the people who contributed to this book. And I'm just so grateful, especially in the context of a pandemic when it really feels like our worlds are shrinking in lots of ways, that this book for me has just been this heart expanding project of feeling like I have a deeper sense of community, not only with Orcas, but also with all of the people who participated in this project.
Mm-hmm. And for you, Nikki, I know you put so much time and effort into this amazing collection of stories and art.
Yeah, I mean, similar to Jessie, I had an early, you know, kind of concern. And also as someone who has mixed settler heritage and Indigenous heritage, a piece of the cornerstone of the work that I do that I've been saying out loud for a really long time, so I need to embody it as well, is like really holding accountability in the spaces that you have. You have the accessibility to enter that, where you can have a voice, where you can have an impact. And so I felt like this was a place where I had the credentials and I had the capacity to hold my own space in a colonial institution, and at the same time to create space for the voices that I really want to hear more from and I want to see uplifted, and the specialists that are not recognized as specialists, and the knowledge keepers who don't get to have their names on plaques. So it felt, you know, I think that this is a time that's really requiring a lot of us to really ask ourselves like what we're able to hold, and how much can we expand our capacity to step into what's needed at this time. And the opportunity to bring like all of you who are on this call today, as well as every single person who is involved in that book, to knit, exactly as Jessie said, to knit together a community of care for these whales, because, and that was another piece, is that this is the first project I've worked on in a really long time that isn't overtly political in some way. And I feel like we really need to call in beyond just our scope and just our choirs. We need to call in the hearts and minds that we maybe haven't been communicating so well with in the past. Mm-hmm. So the museum are part of that, as well as so many of the people who are also invested in this coast, maybe for different ways. But we ultimately like need the same things to breathe and survive, and feed ourselves and care for our children. So I thought this would be a really good place to start, and especially starting with that love and that like kind of wonderment that Eric, you talk about, first coming to Canada and seeing Free Willy, and like what does it look like if we work to collectively do better and come up with innovative solutions from a place of wonderment and like love versus anger and opposition. And so, yeah, it felt like the right step to take. And so been really beautiful to see everything that's unfolded. And exactly like you said, Misty, I've never worked with so many scientists who decided to speak straight from the heart. And to me, that was a really good sign that we were heading in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So just before I move on here, one of our attendees said that the L Potters are at Robson Bight on the Rubbing Beach right now. So that's one of the family groups of the southern resident killer whales. So that's really special to know. Thank you so much, Caroline. And before we move on, really quick, if everyone can share where they are right now. Want all the speakers, yeah.
I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia.
Great.
I'm on Pender Island in the traditional territory of the Wasanich people.
I'm here on Salt Spring Island. I'm in Cowichan territories.
I'm in my office in downtown Bella Bella, in the heart of Healthsignation.
Great. All right. So I think right now, if it's okay with you, Eric, I'd love to share your art that you contributed to the book, and would just love to know what you were hoping to convey with this piece. Here, I'll pull it up here right now. There we go.
Yeah, well, I tend to start a lot of my paintings with the first emotion, which is frustration, because you're just trying to figure out what to put on this blank canvas. But the more I kind of layered it and added it, I always wanted, or I had this feeling that I wanted some weight in front of something delicate. So that's where I kind of started moving towards this idea of fine balance. And it's this idea of this heavy mammal tenderly holding this delicate flower, and just balancing, just anchored enough in order to kind of hold the stratosphere and still be grounded in some sort of way. And so that took 2 weeks of exploration and understanding. And out of that, it really, I am slowly, through my wife, getting better at understanding environmentalism. I'm a huge activist, human rights, but now I'm finding that my knowledge base for environmental activism needs to be catered just as much as my humanitarian activism. And so this painting actually kind of started that for me. I kind of started watering my plants different. I kind of started trying to dive into the idea of, well, if we all live in this fine balance, what's my part in it? And I figure as an artist, my part is to try to hopefully convey my image of nature doing this delicate balance act while holding the stratosphere above him and then still grounded to the floor. And yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing. And your art has such a style. Can you talk about kind of the background to your art?
Yeah, well, when I was 12, I remember being 12, and that was Christmas of '98. So we were in Canada for about 2 years. And we were, my mom, was trying to get her bearings on work. And I'll never forget getting this art book from her when I was 12. It was like one of the more valuable books I had as a child. And that really sparked so I was fortunate to have a mom who, amongst all our traveling through refugee status and all the things, she still found this way to kind of foster my creativity. And the more I kind of explored my own understanding of my heritage, the more I found my own voice, and art really became crucial to me in my earlier 20s, severe depression, and especially when you're in a collection of guys, no one ever wants to talk about depression or these existential crises you go through. And I'll never forget just the worst 2 weeks of my life at the end of August when I was 20, and somebody dropping off some art supplies and canvas because they saw my sketches. And that took me to a whole other tangent. And it kind of went in this amalgamation of understanding where my Rwandese heritage, my East African heritage stands in contemporary art. Because there tends to be a romanticization of African art. So it's held back in the 1920s because people want the African masks, they want the Congolese headdresses. So artists there aren't really allowed to explore and push past that. And previous to Picasso's Cubism, he had his the Negro period. And so a lot of his inspiration for Cubism stemmed from Congolese ritual masks, which was previous to like 1910. So the idea of somebody taking the history of this and making such a popular movement made me want to kind of harken back to that. And I tend to use New Afro Picasso as my name, just to kind of reclaim him, his Cubism, with my own Afrocentric, heritage again. And so yeah, art, it's been the most crucial cornerstone to my life. And the exploration of it, I'm just thankful to have found that. And any artists, musicians, or writers, or anyone that finds that thing knows what that feeling is. And it's been a blessing to actually be able to catch and find it and use it.
Amazing. Thank you. Popping over to Jess, I'm wondering if you can talk about the piece that you contributed to the book. And I know that you're a recipient of intergenerational knowledge, and just talk about how you relate to the coast and to killer whales.
Yeah, I never follow instructions. So before I answer that question, I just wanted to say, Eric, I've never had the opportunity to talk to you before tonight, but when I was flipping through this book for the first time, I got so emotional when I saw your piece. I'm getting emotional talking about it. No. In a good way, in a really beautiful way. Because when I looked at the piece that you created, it looks to me like this orca is wearing a traditional regalia, like a blanket. And I see this, oh my God, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're making me cry.
Cry fast. But it just reminded me so deeply of these images of my grandmother's generation, my great-grandmother's generation, these beautiful old women hunched over in their button blankets, still dancing, and holding this really deep knowledge that they carried through every horrific wave of colonization to bring me so much strength. And the idea that, I'm looking at it right now, that's why I'm crying. But the idea that coming from such different places in the world and such different lived experiences and backgrounds, that you can speak to each other across that in such powerful ways. I just want you to know how grateful I am for that.
Oh my God, thank you so much. That's maybe the nicest thing I've ever heard. I'm sorry, I feel like I already know you. Yeah.
It wouldn't be a webinar with me if I didn't cry on it.
I know.
First thing you need to know about me. But to answer your question, Alex, I feel so blessed to have the privilege of growing up in my community and to be surrounded by generations older than me and generations younger than me now who have such incredible connectivity and wisdom. And it's so easy to focus on all of the ways that intergenerational knowledge has been fractured and diminished by the impacts of colonization. But there's so much incredible strength too, and so many ways in which that knowledge speaks to you through your non-human kin. And so I'm grateful that I've had access both to my own elders and to elder orcas and other animal kin who've taught me so much about how I need to show up in my relationships to everything around me, to the whole community of love and care all around me. And that's been such a formative part of my life. And I want to share, while I'm on my big emotional tear, But not long after I agreed to share a contribution in this book, my dad, who is my hero, my best friend, had a tragic accident. He broke 18 bones. He had a wicked concussion. He looked for a while like he wasn't going to pull through. And at that time, it was like right around when my contribution was due. And I came so close, so many times, to failing on my commitment to share an essay in this piece, in this book. And I'm really proud of myself that I managed to dig deep and come up with the piece that I did contribute in the end. For me, it's a really raw and really emotional piece that I think in lots of ways really is tied to that idea of intergenerational knowledge, that transmission of strength and resilience from generation to generation. And so much of the framing of my essay is about my relationship with my dad and the ways in which he and other people taught me who I am in relation to what's around me. And I just really want to acknowledge my gratitude for all the people who have helped to be part of that really formative teaching, including Misty too, who's known me since I was like a tiny little girl. So I've been so blessed to have that immediacy of community and knowledge and love around my relationship to my territory.
Amazing.
Well, thank you for continuing to write, Jess, because your piece was one of the ones that made me cry as well. So I really am grateful for the so many threads that you wove together and so beautifully, and your awareness through all of it was, yeah, mind-blowing. So I'm really grateful you persevered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. Nikki, I'm wondering what it means to you to bring all of these brilliant people together.
Like, I feel like Jess opened the floodgates, so any tears that happen from here on just are what they are. I just want to say, even at the height of the kind of not so fun parts about this book, which is like harassing all of you multiple times to re-sign a waiver that had one term changed, or like submit invoices, or all of that stuff that I don't love. Even when I was starting to kind of have this, you know, like obligatory relationship with this book, anytime I'd sit down with the contents, I would absolutely end up crying. And like similar to what you were saying, Eric, like the teachings, the ways in which that this book in its even creation process kept on teaching me. Even when I tried to regard it as work, it wouldn't allow me to do that. And so what was the question, Alex?
Just what it means to you to bring together all these amazing people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's two stories I want to tell. One is that I actually was right around the time that my deadline was coming up to bring all of the pieces together and put them into, you know, the first suggestion of order. I was actually up on Mauna Kea, and I went to Mauna Kea because the Kanaka Maoli people of Hawaii have been mentors of mine and have received me as a student multiple times, and we've received them here. And my program that I'm a part of at the University of Victoria has a long-standing relationship that predates me, in hosting and sharing and doing that exchange. And even the coast here with Hawaiians has a much longer history that predates colonization of exchange and cultural exchange and knowledge exchange and nation to nation relationships and families, groups joining, and a lot of teachings around whales and how they too are conduits that bring knowledge and consciousness across the oceans. And so this time last year, right around this time, the first arrests happened at the base of Mauna Kea, and it was the kapuna, it was the elders who insisted to be the front line of defense. And so they actually chained themselves to the road. And I kind of, in the middle of that day, heard what was going on, started watching the live streams, and saw a lot of elders who I've learned from on that land be carried even in their wheelchairs to police cars. And I lay in the fetal position for a good 12 hours and then got a call from a friend who runs Photographers Without Borders. And she just like was like, do you want to go to Mauna Kea? And in an instant, I knew that I needed to be there because they've given me so much. And it was a time that I had a skill set and an ability to help, you know? And so we just got on a plane and went to Mauna Kea. And I was there for 10 days and it was the most beautiful place I've ever been on earth. Not just the place itself, but the configuration and the gathering of people who'd come together to actually enact what revolution from love looks like, what land defense rooted in culture and kapu aloha, which is the term that they were using of like in our highest selves, being accountable to land. And I just spent 10 days there as a journalist and as a documentarian, but also just as a really humble human being who got to see what that could look like. And I had to fly home early because I had to get the transcript done for the book. And so it was on the flight home from Hawaii that I kind of went over all of the pieces, like with every piece together. And leaving Mauna Kea was like leaving a whole different planet, because what had been created there was such a profound sense of reciprocity, accountability to each other, and accountability to land. And then sitting on the plane with all of your words. And, you know, we have Haley, who's an artist from the Big Island of Hawaii, who's one of the artistic contributors of the book. And, you know, people from so many different walks of life and so many worldviews and perspectives and many different generations and genders. But sitting there with like all of your pieces of writing and art and poetry while I was flying home from Mauna Kea, I just cried the entire plane ride, because I realized that, just as you said, Jesse, the community of care, like we have the capacity to do this here. If we have the courage, if we can find the courage within ourselves, and if we can find our humility to the extent where we can get over our egos, we have the capacity to protect this place. We have the capacity to truly learn from the things that these whales have been teaching us for so long, to do better, to do so much better, and just how beautiful that looks, not just for our environment, but for our communities when we stand like that. So this book like really seated in my heart at that time, just coming out of that experience. And I thought a lot as well in regards to the orcas, about the ocean and the ways in which like you can't own the shoreline, you can't own the tide, you can like draw an imaginary line in the sand, but it doesn't make it in a border unless anyone else like buys into it with their mind frame. And so the oceans really remind us, and the creatures of the ocean really remind us how fictional our notion of jurisdiction over land and waters and nutrients and the patterns of Earth's energy are. And I think that anything that can be a porthole to humble us in that way is so necessary at this time. Mm-hmm. And the last story I'll just share about what it meant, because it felt like a really big job too, to make sure that we really reached out and had the right people to be in between the pages of this book, because I did take this as a huge opportunity and as a big responsibility, both to everyone that's here now and to future generations. Because like I said in the introduction, I don't want this to be a eulogy. I don't want this to be a historic text of remember when we had orcas here. Remember when that was something we saw. I'm not okay with that. So it was really important that we reached out and we had the conversations and we made the space accessible and comfortable and inclusive and meaningful for everyone to feel like they could be a part of this book that felt right for them. And so after the transcript had gone in, I was invited to a salmon feast in Alert Bay. And about half the people who are in this book were in the room as well. We're in the big house in Alert Bay. And it just gave me a really, like, people I'd never met before and had only exchanged emails with, like, were across the room. And I only knew them from their, headshot that goes in the back of the book. And so to be, in that territory, hosted by the community and really there to talk about salmon and talk about salmon defense and see half the contributors. Misty, I believe you were there. Were you? No, okay. Yeah, but it felt really good. It felt like a beautiful affirmation of being like, okay, we're on the right track, because so many of the people who showed up to contribute are also showing up in their lives in every way, to be active community members of care, of protection, for the whales that they spoke for. So it felt really, really good.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. That reminded me, Jess, that I've seen in your writing before that you talk in Healthsignation Ways of Knowing that killer whales are a call to act with humility. And I'm just wondering how that's informed your work.
Yeah, I promised to answer this one without crying. You know, I feel really fortunate that I've been able to grow up with my worldview being really deeply enriched by the cultural teachings that continue to thrive around me. And in my essay, I talk a little bit about the role that orcas play, sort of intermediaries between the kingdom under the sea and those of us who live above it. And you know, they're this reminder for me when I see them and when I think about them, that bigger things exist than me, that the system of laws and governance and values that guide me in my life are not the only systems that exist in the world around me, and that I need to be mindful of that in the ways that I show up in my territory, in my homeland, and in my relationships with everything around me. And I think that humility is a very deep cultural teaching for Healthsignation in general, but for me, orcas are just one of those really deep reminders of how viscerally important it is to know how small you are in the vast, beautiful world around you, but how deep your responsibility is and how much power you have to bring good medicine into the world if you're just aware.
Amazing. Misty, I'm going to jump over to you. I know that 4 of us here are in Coast Salish territory, and Jess is up in Healthsignation territory. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the different orcas that we see in those regions.
Sure. So down here in the south where we are, the most common killer whales that we would encounter in the waters around the Salish Sea, essentially, would probably be the mammal-eating Biggs killer whales, and they are now more abundant in their numbers and the times that they're here than the other ecotype of killer whales, which are the salmon eaters. And the salmon eaters used to have a much more predictable presence, at least in the summer, but that is shifting now. So those would be the 2 types we'd had here. So one salmon-eating southern resident killer whales, then the mammal-eating Biggs killer whales, and then up in Healthsignation territory, where Jess is, they would also have those 2 ecotypes, the mammal eaters and the salmon eaters, but the salmon eaters would be a different population, the northern resident killer whales. And so a different clan altogether. And they are separate they sort of keep their distance from the southern residents in time and space. So and then there are another type of offshore killer whales, but they're seen mainly out off the west sides of Haida Gwaii, Vancouver Island, places like that.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a bit about your piece that you contributed to the book?
Sure. So I felt like some of the others so honored to be invited to participate in this book. And it wasn't until I had that hard copy in my hands, I had any idea of what this book was really, what was in it. And other than sort of knowing who some of the authors were, but that was it. And for me, sometimes I have trouble writing, like getting going, but this seemed to be an opportunity to try to weave together this interdependence between salmon and whales and their ecosystem. And I sort of wanted to highlight that, you know, sort of what that evolutionary history was, like how did we get here? and then the other piece that I think that we need to, and you know, hopefully we're talking more about in not just whales but in many other species, is the importance of culture. So I learned, you know, sort of trying to bring all these thoughts together to tell a story. It was a wonderful process, even though Nikki had to ask me several times, Misty, is your chapter done? But it was good. It was great to have the opportunity to write it. And I'd never really brought all those diverse pieces together in one place before. So that was a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Nikki, you mentioned that you wanted this book to be a celebration, not a eulogy. And I'm wondering if you can touch on the recent news that came out that the Supreme Court declined to hear from 3 First Nations groups about their challenge for Trans Mountain.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that Misty would actually be more up to date in the unfolding of that, as well as Jess. You probably have some more information as well, but I'm in regards to the urgency of this book for me, and the importance around the responsibility of doing a really good job with making sure we had the right voices amplified at this time. I had a really strong knowing that this Trans Mountain pipeline piece is not over. And although it has definitely begun, I think that this might be something that we're having to be really involved with on the coast for many years to come. And so I had that understanding like early on, so over a year and a half ago when the book project started, and knew that it was just a matter of time that the contents came to be really like relevant in an urgent way. And so here we are now, and just like, was it 2 weeks ago that the appeal was denied? So yes, there were 6 nations that brought against an appeal for the, in case anyone doesn't know the context, we will put more links up just so that you can kind of do the background research. But just to be clear, the Trans Mountain Pipeline was a pipeline that was initially owned by Kinder Morgan. And when they tried to construct it, ultimately decided that it was not super economically viable for them, which is usually a pretty good evaluation when you have a fossil fuel company who's entirely motivated to make as much money as possible for their shareholders. And despite their evaluation that it wouldn't be an economically viable project, the Canadian government decided to jump in and buy the pipeline outright for $4.3 billion, I believe, of taxpayer money. I think that's the right number. Deciding that it wasn't a worthwhile investment for job creation and the Canadian economy. So we're now at a time when the coastal nations, who are, you know, the ones whose land has been occupied without consent for the past 150 years, as well as the nations who are still very much engaged and rely upon the coast and traditional ways of living, and salmon and orca are a huge part of that, brought against an appeal to the Canadian government for being able to begin construction, as well as 3 NGOs. It was Raincoast, and who are the others who were part of that court case?
The Raincoast court case, we were represented by Eco Justice, and Living Oceans was our partner. We were denied in the Court of Appeal at the beginning of this year. So that was the earlier one on Southern Rapids.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, I mean, there's a lot has unfolded since the outcome of the appeal, which was denied. But essentially, the legal avenues, which are obviously colonial legal systems and ultimately don't really have jurisdiction on these territories that are occupied illegally. But those ways of kind of participating in the Canadian state rule of law have also been denied. So ultimately, Canada's been revealing itself further and further as a petro-state that is not really invested in justice or representation of the people or in any way reconciliation, and that ultimately it's going to be foreign fossil fuel interests that dictate the reality for both our lands and Indigenous people whose territories have been colonized by Canada, as well as Canadian settler people. And I think that this is actually a very powerful and poignant place to be and time to be living in, because this struggle, unlike so many other, Indigenous framed issues, like the CGL pipeline and Wet'suwet'en territory, like everything that's happening in the Alberta tar sands, which really pit, the media plays on these archetypes of pitting Indigenous people against development or against job creation or against the growth of the economy. This is a pipeline that's going straight through Burnaby Mountain, that's going straight through downtown Vancouver, and that all these people who've cultivated their sense of self and their identity as West Coast people, as people who love the water, as people who love to go out on their boats, as people who love to be out and go fishing and harvest clams or oysters or like to explore in the mountains and the rivers. This is the first time we have a massive, huge scale fossil fuel project that's running right through one of the largest cities in Canada. And it's not just Indigenous people who are going to have to live with the consequences of that. And so I'm really interested to see, especially in this time of human evolution, in our own understandings about our ethnic and racial identities, what it looks like when white people, when settler people actually know that they'll have to live directly with the outcomes of the consequences of an oil spill. And so how does that change what our land defense looks like and what our solidarity looks like, both to one another and to our neighbors and to our landscapes?
Mm-hmm. Anyone have anything to add? Eric, I know you mentioned that your work in the past has been more focused on human rights and social justice, and just wondering kind of what it feels like to contribute a piece of art to this book, and if you see any intersections between social and human justice to the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the plight of the Orca.
Yeah, I'll do my best to answer that. Sorry, can you repeat the question? I just want to make sure I get it just right.
Yeah, just kind of how it feels to contribute art to a cause like this, as someone who's worked on social and human justice issues,
Oh, okay.
And what the intersections you see are there.
Yeah, well, at first it's my first published piece, which was a big deal for me. And 10 years you spend kind of just going through canvas after canvas after canvas. But to be given an opportunity to be in something published with, I feel, vastly more experienced, or something like I feel fortunate to be able to be coupled together with such talented people. And I have a tendency to feel like, well, my stuff doesn't deserve to be in there. But the idea of moving into the idea that a collective is crucially needed these days, like in a collective meaning that intellectuals, artists, poets coming together for any cause, is generally the best foot forward for us currently. It's not to find an echo chamber of people that are just gonna echo back yours, to find researchers, anyone that can help create a tapestry of mutual understanding and appreciation. And a lot of my own ideas and movement toward activism was rooted more towards, my family was, I'm Tutsi, we're Rundis, we left in 91, just a few years before the genocide. So a lot of my activism was around colonialism in Africa, and understanding the effects that are still there because of it. And that's generally what I see now, is that a lot of the colonial tactics are so embedded in our immediate patterns of action and speak that we're not aware, and the amount of decades it's going to take to kind of remove those constraints and for everyone to understand. Right now, it just seems that societies are kind of at this heightened state, and we are watching, and now I feel that people are starting to understand that the people have the power, you know. So we see movements that have sparked some of the largest changes we've seen, and people having uncomfortable discussions, which they should. And as defensive as people tend to get, it's open up a discussion. And even me myself, I realized that I could do better at understanding my own politics within Canada, and my own power within the politics and people to help carry the voice even louder. And so this book means a lot to me, you know, first publishing, and also being able to be grouped together with such a vastly different minded people, all somehow coming together for this beautiful book. And it gives me a lot of hope for the future. And as much work that still needs to be done, this is the most, I tend to be very cynical, and that's generally because of my experiences with humanity kind of growing up. But just to see how loud people are getting, and how powerful, and how comfortable in their own skin, it's a very inspiring place to be. And just within a few pages of this book, I feel thankful, and it's kind of making me want it to be better for just the movement of us in the whole. And instead of me thinking of myself as an individual, just doing everything and collecting everything I can for my own sake, the understanding that community is very important. Communication, artistry, understanding how to do proper research, and yeah, just being a better human so we can all kind of move forward, hopefully to a better future. But that's one day at a time.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Jess, can you speak to the ways that Western society interacts with the natural world, and what we can learn from killer whales?
Yeah, I mean, it was in some ways a funny thing for me to grapple with when I was writing this piece, just because growing up here and so deeply embedded in my culture and community and our way of interacting with our homeland, you understand yourself as being part of something bigger than you. You understand yourself as being connected to this beautiful whole system.
See this? This is the volume thing right there. See that green bar?
I'm also trying to co-host or host a Zoom yoga session for Health Women, and realizing that. Sorry. And so for me, like, having to grapple with the kind of mindset that would ever make you feel like you're bigger than or better than the world around you, that you're separate from it in some way, that you actually have the power to dictate to dictate what's happening around you in the world. It's just such a fundamentally different way of interacting that I struggled to articulate it a little bit in the book. But when I was pulling my piece together, I really felt strongly that I want people to understand that there are different ways of knowing the world, different paths to a sense of connection. And those paths aren't more or less valid than one another. You know, we all come to this place by different ways and means. And my path has been really strong and clear for me. But my path isn't everyone's path. And I think that there's so much beautiful, hard, messy, lovely, powerful work ahead for so many people coming from a Western mindset and the ways that Western values frame your relationship with nature. And I just really encourage people to be bold in that work and be gentle with themselves.
Amazing. Moving back to southern resident killer whales, Misty, can you talk about what is currently putting them at risk and what is the state of southern resident killer whales right now?
Sure. Okay. Well, I guess there's two ways to look at what's putting them at risk. There's the very specific immediate things to these whales, all of which flow through salmon. So primarily it's not enough salmon, and it's not just about the numbers of salmon, it's the fact that there's not enough big old salmon that were their prey of choice, that facilitates their energy requirements, their culture, their sharing, those kinds of things. So the abundance of food supply is number one, and the others are the way that sort of these multiple threats kind of intensify when food is low. And so the increase in underwater noise and the disturbance from vessels is one of those pathways. And so when whales are foraging in the presence of vessels, their success rate declines. And then the third, again, flowing through salmon, is that the food that they're eating that should be nourishing them has high levels of a whole host of different pollutants that get delivered to those whales. So all pathways sort of lead through salmon. And so in terms of recovery, we've got to try to address those threats. But those are sort of the detailed specifics of what's threatening these whales. But if we take a step back, it's our human footprint. And no matter whether that's on the land or on the ocean, in the air, however we want to move our unsustainable way of living on the planet is what is threatening these whales. It's our consumption, it's our desire for cheap goods, it's our, we like salmon, we like to eat them. And so there's initiatives that we can take to try to reduce those specific threats, but ultimately, if it doesn't come with changing the way that we're showing up in the world and living on the planet, then it's not a sustainable long-term approach. And Canada and the US are sort of taking different strategies right now to trying to reduce the threats on these whales. And I would say, I don't know that either country has had more success than the other, but the US sort of has been recognizing that we need healthy ecosystems, and we need to, if we can protect food webs and the ecosystems, that we can ensure the increased survivability of all of the food web components. And Canada's approach has been very sort of time and place specific to try to reduce the noise in certain places and times, reduce the competition from fishing vessels in certain places and certain times. But like some of the fundamental underlying issues aren't getting addressed. And that is the way that we're undermining habitat and watersheds and land use, and trying to use these band-aid solutions like hatcheries as something. Hatcheries haven't worked for the 40 years that we've been using them, other than to maintain fisheries. And now the evidence suggests that the presence of hatcheries and the growing number of hatchery fish is actually undermining the recovery of wild salmon. So we sort of have to step back and say, well, how are we going to reduce our human footprint? And so, there are measures that in the last couple of years that have been implemented through, the work of NGOs, raising awareness about these individual threats. And so in Canada now, from a noise perspective, the large ships that are moving through critical habitat have to slow down at, if whales are present. There's an intense whale watching community down here, and the Canadian whale watching companies have agreed to not watch southern residents. That's a really important step, and kudos to them for their willingness to do that in Canada. There's sanctuaries that have been identified, so in priority feeding areas where whales, if they're there, they can feed where the vessels can't go. Some of the larger initiatives around salmon recovery really aren't getting the traction that they need, especially when we look at the recovery of habitat and the importance of recovering wild salmon populations. So that we're really lagging on the most important things that we need to be doing for these whales.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's often talked about how if the southern resident killer whales go extinct, this would be the first population where all the members have a name and are individually identified. And I'm wondering for all of you guys, like what do you make of that?
Do you want me to do you want me to kick that off with just sort of the perspective? So I would say that again, on a couple of levels. One, at a conservation biology perspective, that we're seeing a shift. Conservation biology is always focused on at the population level. If the health of the population is what what the goal is and from a numbers perspective, but as we one of the things that Raincoast does is have an animal welfare ethic, and that is recognizing that they're individuals that make up that population, and their welfare and their quality of life are really important. And those individuals will also play roles within that population that need to be recognized. And so slowly conservation biology as a field is recognizing that. But I think that, again, from a societal level, that we've gotten past that. It's just a group of animals, that these are individuals that, in the case of southern residents, and one of the things the book does so brilliantly is convey that these are such highly intelligent animals, that they're sentience, that they have personalities, that they grieve, that they are individuals. And I think that is what society has really been able to see through, the work of, again, scientists that have recognized them as individuals based on their markings, but the people that work with them and can see that, yes, it is that the population and the family groups are a collection of individuals, and the welfare and the quality of life that those animals have is really important.
Anyone else?
I can jump in. It really struck me near the end of the process of compiling the book, really reflecting on the governance structure and the familial structure of the whales as matrilineal governance structures, and the ways in which knowledge both of hunting, of socialization, of care, for new generations was passed down in those ways. And so in the same way that not only would we know the name of every individual who went extinct, we'd also know the name of their mothers and grandmothers. We also know their history and their stories. And so it's much more than just being accountable to an individual. It's being accountable to generations and generations. And so, there was a moment kind of at the end of the book, the process of creating the book, where there was just such a strong kind of wave that crashed over me of the similarities between the story of the capture and the removal, generation after generation, of the orca whales, with zero consequence to the whole or to the collective or to the long-term outcome of these whales to be commodities and to be used for human purposes. There was such a clear relationship and reflection to the same ways in which colonialism did that with children here in the lands that are known as Canada, generation after generation for over 100 years of theft of children from their families, and how the echoes of that and the reverberations of that are absolutely things that like exist today and will continue to exist long into the future. And, you know, in this era in Canada, where politicians so love to hear the words reconciliation come out of their mouths and have a good sense of themselves about the ways in which they're going to pursue that, it's easy to say when something is historical, we really should have done better. We're really sorry about that. We really should have known better. It's really easy to apologize when it's in the past. But here, and I think a lot of Canadians too want to think of themselves, well, if residential schools were happening right now, I would do something about it. That is not okay. And here we have children not very far from us, not very far south from us, who are being kept in cages at a US border. And so I think, you know, when we take that longer view, that longer historical view, and we really put ourselves as relative to that and in relation to those circumstances, we have to really think, okay, so what does it mean that you were alive and carrying on your daily life while every single last one of these orcas went extinct, and you didn't in any way feel personally implicated to do something about that? What does that look like when you're telling your grandchildren about this? What does that feel like? How do you make space to accommodate for that? And I think what this book really did is it showed that each of us, you know, if we live here on the coast, it's almost impossible to be here and not in some way feel yourself in relationship to the animals that come from this place. And so that does make you accountable. That means the fact that you know and the fact that you're in proximity builds accountability. And so I really feel like everyone listening, everyone who's been reading, everyone who's been part of this should feel personally accountable to knowing every single one of those names. And every single time we see that number drop down from 83 to 81 to 78, that it's, you know, we're here, we're living and we're breathing and we're participating in one way or another in the reality that's allowing this to happen. And so what does it look like to at the very least know that you did what you could, or that you utilized every ability that you had to try and change the story rather than just being complicit with it. And when we take a bit of a step back, you know, the reason that the museum decided to do this exhibition was because orcas are apex predators, as are we as human beings. And so their ecological reality and their ecological destiny isn't very far from ours ultimately. And so there's a lot to be learned in an ecosystem where these animals can't survive anymore. It has a lot to tell us about our own future. And so I hope that people will be motivated from love and not from self-interest. But if it's just from self-interest, there's still a very, very good motivating case to start to pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Jess, as a mother, I'm wondering if you have anything to add to that, and if you want to touch on how it felt to witness Talekwa grieving her dead calf.
I'm gonna cry again.
Okay.
I'm really blessed to be the mom of two wild little humans who are 5 and nearly 3, and watching just the unfettered joy and wonder and curiosity with which they approach the entire world around them has been such a huge motivation to me to relive all of the ways that I was blessed to have that in my childhood, and just to bring so much more of that joy back into my life as I get to watch them experiencing it too. And it's a really lovely, uplifting thing, but it's also a little bit terrifying. You know, I feel like I've been doing community organizing work around environmental issues and big, frightening things for almost my entire life. You know, I was born into activism like every Indigenous person. But that concept of future generations was something that was kind of theoretical to me until I had kids. And, I understood it and it made sense, but it's so deep and visceral when you see these little people, the trust they have in the world around them and your ability as an adult, and in my case as their mother, to facilitate their interaction and their understanding of what's around them. It feels like such a huge responsibility. And you worry so much and you carry so much anxiety, but can I give them the beautiful, intact, wonderful, deep, gorgeous world I grew up in? Or am I giving them something less than what I had? And with what they pick up and carry and what embeds in their little psyches as being such formative teachings, what are they going to then pass on to their children? None of it's rocket science, none of it's new, but it just feels so much deeper and more urgent when you're looking at these little people thinking, like, I brought you into this world and I want to give you the most beautiful world I possibly can. And your sense of responsibility is so much deeper. And so for me, when I watched that whole scenario unfolding with Taliqua grieving her lost calf, I felt that so deeply because it felt like that loss could very well be my loss. I understood on such a deep level, or at least I think I did, how unbelievably devastating it is. And I can't imagine. I can't imagine a world where I experienced that kind of loss and then had to live with what was left. And to see her grieving in the way that her pod uplifted her and the way that they were participants in her grief and the depth of ceremony around what was happening just made it so clear to me that those things my elders have taught me, those stories that have been passed down to me around the society under the ocean, the law, the governance, the values, the ceremonies, all of the ways in which the sacredness of that space plays out, those are so real. They're so real. And so I felt so close in that moment to her as non-human kin, someone I've never met in person, but someone that an entity that I feel really deeply connected to. And I think understanding that the depth of what they feel and the depth of what we feel, there's the gap between them is so small. Nikki talked about just the reverberating impacts of intergenerational impacts of colonialism and theft of offspring and fracturing of relationships and community and ceremony. That happened to them and that happened to us, and that's still happening to them and it's still happening to us. And you carry that sense of sisterhood and kinship so deep inside you. It's something that I still grapple with, honestly. When I think about it, it makes me feel so deeply emotional and makes me realize that their fight isn't separable from my fight. Their future isn't something I can separate from my own future, the future of my children and her children and the Orcas children. They matter as much as mine do, which is a beautiful truth to carry, and one that's simultaneously so heavy and also so light. As hard as it is, I feel blessed to carry it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Misty, I'm hoping that you can share, or if you can share about how, like, clearly these whales are so significant beyond just themselves, as everyone has been sharing. And I'm wondering if you can share, Misty, how ecologically they're significant beyond just themselves.
Well, I think Nikki nailed it when she said they really are sentinels for how we're doing ecologically on this planet, and that their fate is so inextricably linked to our fate. If we can't get it right for them, we won't get it right for ourselves. And I think, here in the down here anyways in the Salish Sea in the Pacific Northwest of the US, we're the most the wealthy and knowledgeable, informed people. And we're so privileged in so many ways to live where we do, and we have all of the information. We know that that we can't keep going the way we are, and if any society is going to get this right before it's too late, it's going to be us. It's going to be here on this coast. And I think that, like, ecologically, we can look at, like, why are top predators important in the ocean and the role that they play. But I also think about, what was the role, like, this is just a question, but did they play a role in, Chinook timing, like the fact that these fish that they've become to depend on were available year round, that return to the watersheds every single month of the year in some of these systems, like for the Fraser, from, March until October, in California every single month of the year. And over time, what role did killer whales have, and what did the Chinook, thinking, well, we got these predators out there that are eating us all of the time. So when we all leave the rivers at once, and we're all going to get eaten. But what if we, what if things evolve? We go to the ocean and we come back to the ocean at different times. And so you just sort of wonder about, how did all those relationships unfold? So, it's usually not until we lose these predators or these components of the ecosystem that we understand what role they played, because we can see what happened when they're gone. And I hope that, that we can make a difference before that happens. We have the knowledge from a modeling perspective, from looking at what population viability analysis tells us, that if we can get more salmon into them and we can reduce noise, that these whales can recover. And they've been as low as they are now in the past. But so it's still possible. It's still possible for them to recover, but we've got to really want to change to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'd love to open it up on that hopeful note to any of you guys, if you want to share a passage from the book. Jess?
Yeah, I'd love to just read the opening passage from my piece. That's okay. I shared a little bit about my dad and my personal struggles around the time that I was writing this piece, and I've talked a lot about my childhood and the place I come from. And really, at the heart of all of the work that I do for me is stories. And so the story at the beginning of this that sort of frames my piece, I think, is something that's really near and dear to me. So I just wanted to share that opening section, which I called Slow Rolls in the Fog. Once when I was a little girl, I was in a skiff with my father. This sentence is how all my best childhood stories begin. This particular time, we were traveling from the village out to camp. It was spring and the fog was so thick that we were traveling by instinct and memory. The vessel reminded me of a piece of driftwood, curved, light, and somehow a little impermanent. I always sat perched high when we traveled in that boat, nestled on top of our gear, my hip to the gunwale so I could lean over and stare into the ocean. As we puttered slowly down the channel, a pod of orcas appeared. It was as though they'd manifested out of the dense fog, and although they overtook us quickly, their pace seemed to slow to match their curiosity. They surfaced and dove too quickly to count them all. It was orcas all the way down. They performed lazy rolls, the calves clumsy, they practiced their spy hopping. Occasionally, an adult would breach with the elegance of salmon and the enormous power of rolling thunder. Their clicks and cries made the skiff shake, and their vocalizations vibrated up into my bones. The hull of the boat was the most fragile of liminal spaces, dividing me from the whales, and the closeness made me feel a deep sense of safety, like the ocean was a womb, and they were the pulse of my mother, beating all around me. They paced us for a while, the females and their calves closest to the boat, and the rest of the pod radiating outward. The dorsal fins that cut the surface were dark against the backdrop of the ocean, and darker against the fog. And there we were, my father and I, cupped in the curve of our little skiff, with the barrier between ocean and sky dissolving all around us. Gradually, the pod carried on ahead of us, and the last we saw was a magnificent bull whose massive head plowed straight toward our boat, turning into a slow dive so close to us the top of his dorsal fin was within arm's reach just before he disappeared beneath the hull. I thought I would feel bereft in that moment. Instead, I felt full. And to this day, nearly 3 decades later, that moment is what slips into my mind when I think of the definition of prayer.
Thank you. It's so beautiful. Misty, would you like to share a passage from your contribution?
Sure. I have to, yeah, Jesse's chapter. It's so good. I think I'll just read at the very beginning. Culture is defined as information or behavior that is shared within a community and transmitted within or between generations through social learning. Culture has always been considered the unique hallmark of human societies. Until recently, the concept had never been ascribed to animals. However, as scientists are recognizing that decades of conservation strategies have failed to identify and account for key aspects of animal societies, this is rapidly changing. Lessons from fish to birds to mammals have shown the importance of social learning. Some people's first contact with animal culture might have been the stories of human guidance provided via ultralight aircraft to assist cranes and geese raised in captivity that learn their migration routes socially. It is seen in bighorn sheep and moose that have been reintroduced to areas and then taken generations to determine the seasonal availability of high quality food. Many now know that a healthy elephant population requires elders to influence the behavior and the development of younger animals. Even reef fish learn to identify predators without direct experience through socially transmitted information. These transfers of behavior and knowledge lead to improved survival. The resilience of cultural diversity, along with genetics, appears to be key to the persistence and resilience of a wide range of animal populations. We keep going, or is that, we probably don't have time. I'll leave it there. I didn't really get into whales yet though, but that's that. It takes context.
You'll have to buy the book. If anyone has questions, be sure to put them in the Q&A box and we can go through those. But in the meantime, I'm wondering, it's kind of a hard question, but what can people do to show support for killer whales?
Well, I can start with an action piece that if you care about these whales, you need to let our federal ministers know that. And specifically, both Jonathan Wilkinson is making a decision soon about whether to expand or construct a very large terminal in the heart of the Fraser Estuary that affects killer whales through a few pathways, both their food supply and their acoustic quality of their habitat. And so commenting and letting Jonathan know that the Terminal 2 expansion in the Fraser Estuary is a really bad idea, both for the recovery of Chinook and for killer whales. That's one thing. And then secondly, I think our fisheries minister really needs to hear that these conventional approaches to fisheries management are failing the fish, they're failing communities, they're failing the ecosystem, and we need to really think about what recovering wild salmon runs and wild populations looks like in British Columbia, and embark on that journey. So that's what the federal fisheries minister, Bernadette Jordan, needs to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I can jump in as well. First of all, I really want to say that there are amazing folks who have dedicated their entire lives to understanding both orcas and our coastal ecosystems. There are knowledge keepers and holders of traditional ecological knowledge that far predates any kind of science or so-called Western science that exists on these lands. That those knowledge systems have been in existence for thousands and thousands of years without creating extinction in cohabitation. So I think like really recognizing that the folks who have actually been doing the work and who hold those levels of understanding into the interconnectedness of ecosystems are the ones that we should be supporting, and really looking at how do we follow their directive and how do we support them in the work that they're doing. Because if that's not what we've committed our lives to, then maybe we should put our energy and our resources towards supporting those who have done that. And so I really encourage everyone, regardless of what territories you're on, to really find out whose territory you're on. And find out what the particular interests and struggles of the community whose lands you're occupying right now are, and support them and their work, as well as to look for some of the coastal NGOs like Raincoast, who have been doing incredible work for a very, very long time. And rather than trying to figure things out on your own, really go and utilize the resources that they've created. That being said, I love the term that Jesse brought forward at the beginning of this discussion about communities of care. And I think that, as much as there's very specific, important, immediate items that need to be addressed and challenges that we're facing in this moment, there's also the much larger story of how we got here in the first place. And that same like reflectiveness and echo that if these apex predators aren't doing okay, then neither are we, ultimately. And so I really, we talk about it in the introduction of this book, of just my mom having a dream and having the courage to talk about it, and that resulting in, dozens of people who'd never met before spending a day together talking about how to move people from the heart. And so like start a reading book, like start a reading club, bring people together, have it be something that would transcend age and political persuasion and ethnicity, and get a group of people together who just come because they love orcas or want to learn more, and spend time together, share stories, share the same kind of conversation we shared today about, from Healthsignation territory to someone coming from Kenya to be here, to, Misty spending her life out on boats and looking at all the kinds of things about salmon that nobody would ever even think to ask, all the different ways of life and perspectives that have brought us together to be in between these two covers. And so that's, I think, one of the things that's so profound and magical about ecology, is that exact wonderment that Jess talked about seeing in her children. When we tap into it, no matter how old we are, it awakens in us. And I think that ultimately it is going to be love that gives us the courage and the energy and the stamina and the intergenerational capacity to write our direction and write our course so that survival is even a possibility. So I really encourage, check out Raincoast. They've got amazing stuff going on right now. Healthsignation has been doing incredible work in terms of sovereignty in their own territories. There's Guardian Watchmen programs that are amazing. There's so much incredible stuff going on the coast. So if you want to support Orcas, there's already so many organizations that have been doing that work for a really, really long time. So just, we'll put some links in the discussion board so that can be right at your fingertips. And then if you want to do something that builds community and builds capacity and strengthens those communities of care, this book is a really good gateway to start that and to bring people together. And from there, the conversations that can happen and the solidarity that can happen is truly infinite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll also send out a follow-up email with lots of links as well. So no worries on finding them before this Zoom ends. Jess, do you have anything to add, or Eric?
I would just add that, another really important fundamental action that I hope people will take is to trust themselves. It's really easy to look at how big this is and how multifaceted and how urgent it is, and to think to yourself, this is too big for me. There are better, smarter, more energetic people, whatever the other is that you think you can rely on. Trust yourself. You're part of this. As a Healthsick woman living in my territory, my identity can't be separated from the lands and waters I come from. Everything about who I am is connected to this place all around me, and I can't be who I am without Orcas. I can't be who I am. My culture won't be true. My language won't be true. All of that's gone if we lose these. And I don't get to choose whether I fight for that, because fighting for Orcas is fighting for my entire identity as a Healthsick woman. If you can choose to be part of the fight, trust yourself and choose it and do it, and know that you're part of an incredible community of people who have put their hand up and said, I'm going to be part of this. You should be. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I would say maybe finding things that are conducive, changing your media diet. So things that are conducive to pushing the boundaries and facets, because I don't know anything. I consider myself a pretty dumb dude. And from that base, I kind of listen to people that know more than I do. And so podcasts, we live in the era of podcasts and sound. So I believe if you're able to change your media diet and incorporate something that is nature-based, something that really speaks to you, I tend to find out over a few months, your brain rewires and you have a new language for this thing that seems so daunting. You have a new perspective because you're listening to people who are passionate about it and want to make these movements happen. And so if there's any advice, I would say is not even changing, but adapting your media diet to incorporate something that helps your brain form a new understanding of your world and our world at the end.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you guys so much. I just wanted to open up if there's any more closing remarks from you guys.
It's just so wonderful to be with all of you for this and to hear your words, because they almost came to life through the pages, but to hear them from you and see you in person is wonderful. And you're also wise. It's really an honor to be part of this project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel super inspired after this. And for everyone watching, we'll send out a follow-up email with lots of links and how to get involved and more information. Tomorrow on Raincoast's Instagram, we'll be doing a book giveaway, so look out for that post. And yeah, thank you so much, Jess and Eric and Nikki and Misty, I know you're all such busy people, and I feel so happy that you guys joined us tonight, and we're all super lucky to hear from you. So thank you so much.
I just want to say one thing before we go, and I am so honored. Misty, Eric, Jess, you are all heroes of mine. And like this opportunity, again, part of the reason that I said yes to this opportunity is because I could see that there was a pathway to uphold voices like all of yours. And I really, truly mean that, Eric. I remember seeing you when we were in elementary school and just like seeing you when you first arrived here. And you've always made an impression on me. And Eric, even when he was just an emerging artist, just getting started. I remember I was holding a conference for young women of color, and he donated this beautiful piece like years and years and years ago. And I think about that, like, as I think about the coast, of the way in which, you know, we live our lives, but our paths overlap and intercept, and the ways in which we build intergenerational relationships for containers. And so like this, I hope one day will be a story that we get to pass on to our future generations, and they'll say, oh yeah, my mom and you were in that book, in the same way that Jesse and I know our parents used to organize together. But I think like this is a time that really calls on us to come together in that way. And this coast connects us in that profound way. And the story, just as you said, Misty, we are a place on earth that could lead that model forward in terms of what does it look like to change direction? What does it look like not to be a story, a eulogy, but a celebration? But we're in this time, and so we have to take a deep breath and step forward into it. And so I just consider all of you these like incredible beacons of hope and wisdom and strength. And it meant so much to me that each of your voices are in this book. And I really, I'm a humble person, but it's been really easy to tell people what a magical book this is because of all of your voices being in it. And that's the truth, is that this is a magical book, and it's because it has a piece of every one of your hearts in it. And that's what magic is when we can become something bigger than ourselves, outside of ourselves, and co-create together. So I really hope that the forces in between the covers, as well as like the ways in which our lives will continue and our work will continue, with the Orcas included in that, and Talekwa and what she brought to us, and that power and that declaration of sovereignty and resilience, it lives in us too. So I just am so full of gratitude and humility. And I'm really, really thankful to all of you, and really thankful to you, Alex, for holding this space and doing the techie end of stuff that's not so much fun, but you kept us afloat, and I'm so grateful.
It was truly my pleasure. And thank you for those closing remarks, Nikki. And thanks for your work on this book too. It's truly amazing. All right, well, I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you again to everyone who joined and our amazing speakers. And I hope you all have a good night. Okay, bye.
Bye. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Jesse.
Bye, guys.
Bye,
Nikki.
Bye.
Bye, Misty.